Even in an AI-focused world, MacroEdge is in the business of focusing on you. We don't just understand our clients, we listen to what's said and illuminate on what's not. In a world moving at the speed of light, with shifting markets, evolving workforces, and non-stop disruption, MacroEdge helps you to navigate and identify novel opportunities, expand your enterprise, and succeed in tomorrow's world. And it all starts with you. Put your enterprise and your perspective in the driver's seat. We're in the business of you.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to MacroEdge Radio. This is John Galt speaking. It's good to be back. I've been under the weather, dealing with some other health issues. Hey, that's part of life when you get older. I can tell you that right now. And trust me, it is not enjoyable when you get to my age and you have to sit there and start dealing with the various maladies of old age and not realizing you're 19 years old anymore, much as I still think that I am. We have a special show tonight, and we'll touch on the markets very quickly. It was a violent week in markets. CPI came out today. I'm just going to quote the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta sticky CPI, still at 3%, including the annualized rate. So core sticky and sticky are still at 3%. There's been no massive improvement there. The Dow bounced back after a dramatic day yesterday, but it's been nonstop distribution, including today, up 48.95. Just another day with, 700, 800 point swings. NASDAQ down 50 to 22,546. S&P up a whole $3 to 68.36. Russell bounced 1%. I guess the shorts are starting to cover before they get the hell out of there. Gold up another 119. Gold and silver are behaving violently. And if you look at the market pattern, the chart pattern, this will be my only chartology of the night, you will note that we're seeing violent moves, the upside and the downside. And this is usually a precursor to the end of a major bull market. And we've been in one. We can't lie about it. We've all been waiting for it to sit there and tank. Is it going to happen tomorrow? Who the hell knows? It won't happen Monday. We're closed for a holiday. But the ongoing situation, the violent moves up and down, are indicating distributive patterns, and most people are ignoring it. When you start looking at individual issues like, Netflix, which is down 36% in the last 6 months, you begin to realize perhaps making the Squid Games year-round might have been a better decision. When we talk about jobs, though, and this is why we have our fantastic guest on tonight, repeat appearance, the one and only Amanda Goodall, aka at the Jobs Chick on X. Amanda, welcome to the program.
Hey, glad to be back again.
It is so awesome to have you because what a week this has been. And I'm going to just open the floor to you first. I want to hear your take on this great, personally speaking, I call it Pulp Fiction because the revisions were the tail of the tape, but the lack of household survey data with a less than 70% response rate is telling and just how stupid this report really is. Take it away, please.
Oh my gosh. I mean, and anybody that's listened to me and read my stuff, I just don't even buy the Fed data. Years ago it worked. Years ago it was probably mostly real. Now it's just made up BS. And when you look at you look at what they're putting out there and the numbers that they're putting out, and now they're saying they're not going to do it, and you compare that to the workforce data that I look at company by company, it doesn't even make sense. It does not even make sense. And I mean, what are we right now? I mean, we have 7.36 total unemployed right now is what they're putting out. 1.8 million long-term unemployed. It is way worse than anything they could possibly put out in numbers, and that's why they're not doing it. And frankly, I think a lot of what's going on is being really mislabeled by what companies are doing, the outsourcing, the offshoring. Nobody can follow it. I swear, some days I think even the companies don't even know what they have as far as headcount goes.
Well, you know what? You and I are going to hammer that pretty hard in a minute on the layoff side of things. Yeah. But I got something to throw into this. U6, which is my primary methodology for measuring this, was seasonally adjusted to 8% this year. But if you look at the non-seasonally adjusted rate, it's 8.7%, up 0.5% from January of last year and December of last year. That to me is more telling to the direction of where the unemployment rate should be and is going. And do you think we probably will see 10% U6 as people are just getting frustrated and trying desperately to take anything they can, regardless of economic reasons or other problems within the labor force? It really looks, and you get to see this on the front line with your help with people trying to get jobs. It really seems a level of frustration has built despite the snowstorm excuse they use to cover their tracks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just going to keep climbing. I was actually asked about this a few days ago on a call with a hedge fund, and they were just like, "Is this going to keep happening? Are layoffs going to keep increasing? Are we going to see U3, U6 go up?" And I'm like, "Yes, for now, but at some point, it's gonna like stable out a little bit." And I'm starting to wonder if it's going to be towards the end of this year, and it's not because people are going to be finding more jobs. It's just we're going to be at this capped level. And whatever it lands on, whether it's 10 or above, and whatever the real number happens to be, that's where we're going to sit for a while as companies figure their stuff out.
What do you make of the anecdotal data you hear from frustrated workers? And by that, I mean those that you're trying to help get in at the professional level. You do a lot of work with individuals. You've never listened to our show before with Amanda. She is fantastic in trying to provide assistance and guidance. But at this point in time, I think the AI excuse is just bull. I think what we're seeing more of now is an actual white collar rolling recession hitting all of the mid management and other levels of industry.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I haven't actually really worked with too many individuals in the past couple of years. I'm kind of more focused on, really looking at what companies are doing, and reading between the lines and reporting on that. But I get so much information from people. I feel humbled sometimes that all these people are coming to me to tell me what's really going on, what they're seeing as well. And then, I can take that and look back at the data and see what actually lines up. So, we are seeing stuff from the inside and stuff from the actual data that's going on. And I try to put it all together on what's going on. People are beyond frustrated because nothing is really pointing in the same direction. What companies are saying and what they're doing completely different. And that includes whether you're working at a company or you're looking for a job. So everybody is just confused and not really sure which direction to go to, especially with regards to their career. We have all these conversations about companies hiring specialists over generalists now. Well, what does that mean? They're not really saying a lot. And that's leaving a lot of people in the lurch right now. And that is what makes me worried for the overall economic health of the consumer right now. Just looking for jobs and trying to, have a better life and a better job.
And I apologize for that. I meant to refer to the anecdotal information you're receiving from people
Mhm.
contacting you because you have published so many fantastic missives from individuals. And sometimes I think we all are guilty of this. And it's a big problem with Finchwit. We focus on quote unquote the corporations. We forget about all the souls they impact. And you've done a great job of bringing those stories forth, saying, guys, gals, there's something else happening here. So I'm going to hit a few stories. I decided to do one of those geek things. And yes, folks, I do have a life. I do have a wife, and I do pay attention to things outside of economics. But the WARN notice is from Florida. And there's some new ones. And I'm just going to throw these out here. T-Tech, probably never heard of them. Well, they run the toll bridge. It's a T-Tech Government Solutions, and it is ceasing operations at the Skyway. If you're not familiar, the Sunshine Skyway ties the peninsula between Pinellas County and Manatee County. Huge bridge, beautiful, all that. All 57 are terminated April 30th. Now, nothing against the individuals there, but those are not what you're going to call high-skilled workers. But there's 57 more hitting the layoff records. Illumis, an industrial lighting product company over in Titusville, Florida, is terminating the facility. They're closing it. And unbelievably, people don't seem to think about these things. That's another 84 manufacturing jobs going bye-bye. The big one was DHL shutting down operations in Lakeland, Florida. They had an exclusive contract for the airport for transportation and warehousing. If logistics, as we heard the media broadcast about so much, about, wow, look at all the booming growth in logistics and commerce, why would DHL shut down a Central Florida location where they had an exclusive contract for bringing air freight into Lakeland Regional Airport? You start adding this up. 2 plus 2 no longer equals 4, does it, Amanda? And the big one tonight, and this one will blow your mind. Remember the comeback of coal? 530 workers in Logan County, West Virginia, and 7 mines are being idled. We're hearing one thing from the politicians, but seeing corporations act separately. And I think that's the concern that people are not paying attention to. And I fear that the data is masking an underlying rot that's not going to bounce back quickly. What is your take on that?
Yeah, absolutely. The WARN notices, companies are figuring out how to get around WARN. So the ones we see are the ones that the companies, I guess, aren't, quick enough, smart enough these days. They're really changing. If you're waiting for the WARN notices to tell you restructuring's happening, you're really behind. And companies aren't doing it to like violate the law. They're just getting smarter. They're managing the math, and they're keeping reduction under the threshold, staggering timing. They're bringing in contractors, or they're moving it, they're reorging and absorbing their company in a different way, so it doesn't really look like it, so it doesn't quite trigger the headlines. So that's something we definitely want to watch overall. I'm starting to see this not so much just even in the bigger companies, but even in the smaller ones as well. We are seeing that changing. And as far as like, believing the politicians and what's going on, it was funny, a few months ago at CES, I was there and listened to several of the senators speak. And hearing what they were focused on was just like, do you know how many jobs you're going to be destroying by what you're doing? And they're doing this in a way that they're like, oh no, if we bring in, different kind of broadband into certain areas, it's going to help. And I'm like, no, if you think about it, those people live in these certain pockets where there aren't jobs that are remote. Well, if now people can be more remote and people can hire, you're going to change the whole scope of what small towns are going to see. So it's this really weird conversation to see what's going on with politicians and how they are changing that goalpost and just not being aware of the situation that the American working public is seeing and what they're worried about in just keeping their jobs and maintaining a sense of normalcy.
Do you believe, as I do, that the quote unquote K shaped economy, the lower leg of the K, is accelerating to the downside, and the spending and expensing and ridiculousness of the upper K, and I'm not penalizing anybody, and I'm not going to lie, I'm not in the lower K, is creating a mixed economy which will shift the job market permanently as people try to create efficiencies, even if those efficiencies are not readily or realistically attainable?
I think we're already starting to see that. And yeah, I mean, the lower K is just getting out of hand. And, everything that we're starting to see happen with companies, with the way they're hiring, with the way they're changing the entire structural shift of what the labor model looks like, really does go to show us where we are moving. And it gets a little bit more normal, fingers crossed, right? But I think the way companies are working on, they're focusing on the leverage that they have to be the front runner, and that is the only focus right now. And fair, that's what companies are supposed to do. But for the American workers, we are trying to catch up and trying to keep up. And overall, I would say probably in the next like 3 to 5 years, and that's a hard one to even just pull a number out of the blue like that. But I would say in 3 to 5 years, I think we will start seeing some of that normalcy come back. But in the meantime, it is really, really tough out there if you are on the lower K. And even if you aren't and you get laid off, the chances of you joining into that side is pretty great.
Well, that brings us to the story that hit this week, and I'm just bringing a pull story out of the blue on you that I love to surprise my guests, you know that, and I love hearing
Yes.
you respond because you're so darn good at this. We had a story this week about Gen Z coming into college with a elementary school reading level. Now, in my personal opinion, that doesn't do anything to substantiate the theory that we're going to quote unquote grow our way into the future. Because I know this is going to sound crazy, people, but if you can't read a technical document, how in the Sam hell are you going to engage in the necessary programming repairs of the very robots or AI that you want taking care of mama in the home?
Yeah, that's pretty wild. I mean, I've seen the different stats, what, 25% of all US unemployed, have 4-year degrees. What we're seeing right now with the younger generations right now is actually pretty wild. I haven't heard that. That is terrifying. What you just said, that if they're reading at that level, that is actually terrifying. But, the way education is so archaic and the way universities are just not changing and catching up, I believe it. It is a sad day to say that I believe something like that, but this is something we really have to change and look at the scope of what's happening in the future for our own sakes at this point. We have to be really focusing on saving ourselves and doing whatever it takes to better ourselves, because these companies are not telling us what they need, and reading and general education needs to be on the top of that list there.
Do you think that the lack of employment experience in combination, or the lack of a deep educational background, are the more prevalent problems? Which of the two would you say is the biggest red flag for employers at this point in time? Because personally speaking, if I were running a company again, which we've all had, some of us have had dabbled in, most individuals who have never worked a day in their life don't understand the concept of a work ethos or ethic, nor the idea of maintaining their work ethic to the point where it improves the profitability of the operation or the company. Thus, they get rewarded for their performance. I just think that that is lacking. And it's not just a Gen Z thing. I'm not accusing Gen Z of this. They weren't taught, but we see it all the way up to the age 40 plus, and it scares the hell out of me.
Yeah, I do a lot of reorgs with companies, so I do see that, and it is a really weird thing, and it's weird because it didn't really happen. So even when you're talking about like the Gen X's, they're following into this pattern as well, which is really, really odd to just see. And I'm sitting there going, I just want to shake them and go, what are you doing? Like, come on, guys. Right now, a lot of the companies are straight up looking for the right attitude. They're looking for the right background. Education is changing in as far as requirements go for a lot of companies. I mean, we've seen it in tech a lot. I mean, obviously, there's certain industries like finance. Yes, no, you have to have certain licenses and things like that. Thank goodness. But we are seeing a big change. And when I'm working on reorgs with any of the corporations that I work with, it is just a case of, we go out and we find the exact person we need at this moment. So that's something that I think a lot of people really need to be aware of. Don't just stay within your confines of what you do, but actually, be ready to fit into what a company needs. And that includes that attitude, and that includes that work ethic. And if you feel like your work ethic is lacking, somebody needs to kick your rear and get you going again, because that is a really big thing right now. Just kind of putting in that time and having the right attitude, and companies are really wanting that. I would say that is almost more important than where you got your bachelor's from.
Do you think the lack of people seriously pursuing internships is impairing their ability to move into management positions or even become functional employees at the lower levels? I find that uh, not willing to put in the extra time and effort to sharpen the knife for your future career, so to speak, something that I think impairs a lot of the youth. But now we've seen a whole generation of people who are just passed along to age 30, 35, 40, given a green light and never really challenged to justify their existence in certain positions much less their management skills.
Yeah, the big push on internships these days is really odd. And we are seeing a decrease of entry level jobs, whether they've been outsourced, offshored, or just companies aren't utilizing them as much. So the internship, it feels like they're getting pushed on a lot of the younger generations, and they're not interested in it. That was not something they kind of were even having in their mind. So I think they're really struggling to see the benefits. You've got to get in. It doesn't matter what you call it, whether it's an entry level or it's an internship or you're just a junior, whatever role. You have to jump in at some point. I think the worrying issue, and I think is something that might be holding some of the younger generation back on all of this, is that mid management is kind of gone. Companies are like starting to throw that out the window. And to right, I'm all for that. Mid management layers are just insane, right? So I'm more for that. Like a different type of hierarchy that works better for everybody. But because of that, it does mentally make it a harder concept to move forward for so many young people to go, well, no, I just want to manage. I just want to do this. I want to do a bigger job. I want to have that role, whether it's management or otherwise. They're not seeing that jump into it very easily because there is that gap in the way companies are hiring. They are changing the workforce composition overall. And for young people, that is very scary. Am I always going to be in an internship? Am I always going to be at a junior level? And I think that's what's really scaring them, really making them worried to even get into this from the start.
Well, let's bring it forward. And I'm not attacking again. I'm just bringing forth the arguments we see in fintech, on FinCwit, and elsewhere. Is it more of a entitlement mentality? We do all see that in some cases, or is it more of a lack of social interaction and upbringing? Whereas yourself, myself, and a lot of other people, we had extensive social interaction through high school, college, et cetera, and through our professional contacts. But in this current era, for the last 15, 20 years, a lot of people stared at phones and computer screens and didn't have as much social interaction, thus making them less adaptable or qualified to assume management positions.
That is very true. And, yeah, I think for a lot of people, that is going to hold them back in their career. And that's just something they need to realize so that they can change it. Um, yeah, I mean, the interaction is major. And everything that's happened, I mean, remote existed prior to COVID, of course, but it accelerated everything, and everything has changed from a technological point of view, restructuring point of view, everything that companies are doing these days and how people interact, and again, I'll go back to the me reorging companies and how I actually focus on that to go in there and start auditing what people are doing on a daily basis. They're just in these like Zoom meets all day. Well, that's like 70% of their day. They're not being productive. But they're not being productive in even these groups. So I do think that lack of skill of being able to work with others, even when thrown into a Zoom group of, four or five or six people, they don't know how to move that forward. And I think that is a big part, to blame with all of that. Skills to be learned for sure, and the ones that are gaining on that are the ones that are going to be able to move forward in their career without much problem at all.
So basically, you just validated something that scares the hell out of me. We're still going to be looking at the quote unquote 1% of individuals who aren't scared to stand up in front of 200 people in an audience and do a presentation or display or argue for a particular business plan. And that really does narrow and restrict the ability of individuals to advance into the upper management positions they think they're entitled to.
Yes, sadly, yes, I did validate that. I am seeing that a lot. And we're at a point in, anybody that asks for advice, and when I do different, conversations with different people at different levels, whatever they are in their career, just even with executives that I'm working with, my whole focus is that, everybody in the company has to sit there and you have to fight for yourself and you have to fight for your skills and fight what you're doing. And you are as good as you're going to make yourself. And that is the focus that we have to think about. So let's get that 1% a little bit better. Hopefully people will start seeing that as, this labor model that's being, forced upon us does make us sit there and go, I can't keep living like I am. Let's move forward. How do I do this? How do I better myself?
Outside of your position in consulting, and I've done some management consulting in my past, as we've talked about,
Mhm.
do you find that the term consultant has earned a derogatory notation simply because of the poor performance of financial consulting firms who are simply looking to dump a company into private equity or private capital investments and shark it, versus those that are really truly looking to restructure, modernize, and create actual efficiencies? I mean, in my day, you went like you do, department by department, you analyze. I was in operations, we had sales experts, we had accounting experts. I let the bean counters do their thing, but I was able to create operational opportunities. But we don't seem to have a focus on that type of consulting anymore. It's more, let's break out the machete, cut everyone we can, and let's get this company lean and mean so we can be taken over, get our stock bonuses, and retire. Is it that kind of conflict you're seeing in the consulting industry now? People like yourself who are trying to do the right thing versus the sharks, for lack of a better term.
Absolutely. I think the word consultant has gotten really dirty over the years. And, for whatever reason that's happened, it has become a dirty word. I specifically don't call myself a consultant because I don't want to be associated with that. I use
Thank
the term
you.
advisor,
Thank
right?
you.
But it is a case, you look at the two difference. I mean, consultants come in and they're more short term and they go and tackle the job and and they solve immediate problems. They're really good at band-aids and things like that. Advisors and things like I do, I work long term. My contracts are years plus because I'm not only I'm restructuring, I'm helping a company, but I'm also guiding them through and the overall direction of where they need to go based on their peers and based on what's going on overall. So there is a big difference on advising and consulting. I'll stay out of consulting for sure.
That's what I'm thinking also. And I'm thinking the lack of advisory roles with long-term contracts is impairing American industry, especially in some of the older, more archaic industries, the old economy, so to speak, from
Mhm.
actually modernizing and adapting to this new world, not to mention all the other crap going on with tariffs and trade wars and other stuff. It really does seem that the opportunity that we have now in a low regulation, low capital penalization phase is being wasted by
Mhm.
many companies because of short-sighted management.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. That just repeat that statement for the rest of the show. That is exactly spot on. I mean, we are seeing that and companies are there's a lot of companies that are right now, and I can look at this and I look at this in the workforce data. This isn't just the companies that I advise, but the ones that I look at, you can see they're paralyzed. You can see that they're really struggling to move forward. And there's a lot of risk associated to everything that they're doing, whether it's through corporate strategy or whether it's through just like capital execution. There is a paralyzation that is going on, and management is just not there to be able to deal with that moving forward. And I think we're going to see a lot of sectors crumble a little bit, and they're going to have to get rebuilt up because we need them. But there's a lot of changes going on for sure.
Well, we're going to take a quick pause, but we're not going to pause just to refresh. Our good friend Amanda wants to tell you about her activities on FinchWit and promote her work. Please, we always provide carte blanche to our guests. Let everybody know
Yeah.
how to contact you and what you will offer companies, etc., if they pay attention to your intelligent advice.
You'll have success if you pay attention to it. No,
Sold.
Right? Yeah, catch me on X. That's the easiest way to find me. And I'm on Substack on the Insider Edge. But I try to publish as much as I can everywhere for everybody. And I love advising. I love digging into all of this. I'm like such a data nerd at heart. It's the best part of my day.
I love that, and that's what makes your reading all of your commentary and the information you bring forth fascinating on X.
Thank
And
you.
folks, X is a great news source and information source without going through all the gobbledygook of what the old media presents, which is what MacroEdge tries to do. Hey, here's the data. Make your own interpretation, unless you read one of my papers, in which case you might get a little bit of something more opinionated, talking about what kind of dorks are making mistakes in our American economic structure. So go to macroedge.net/ozone, macroedge.net/ozone, get a 2-week free trial, see what's coming, see ahead of the horizon. Quit looking in the rearview mirror at data which is stale, useless, and from the Bureau of Lying Statistics. With that being said, Amanda, we've seen everyone focused on the quote unquote statistics. Let's talk about one which is a burr in my saddle. Boy, didn't that sound like an old man sitting on a horse in a cowboy movie?
Yes, it
The
did.
weekly unemployment claims, which has been considered a quote unquote measure of current economic activity and how is the jobs economy. When one looks at the structure of weekly unemployment claims, I'll point my shortcomings out to you as I get your opinion, but when you see that data released every Thursday and you realize the uselessness of it, what do you think? Do you think it's just economists or people talking their book, or is there any real value to that data point anymore because of the change in unemployment claims insurance and the structure of how people have to get their money state to state?
Yeah, zero, zero, anything from it. I don't really even look at it. If I see it, I see it because you guys are posting it. I really don't look at it because it's past. It's what's happened in the past, and that's not helping us look forward to the future and what the data is saying is happening now. Weekly claims, yes, I'll post about it occasionally. I'll put a little bit out there. I just don't ever look at it because I don't buy this information. It does not match what's going on. It's skewed, it's changed, it's whatever. My focus is in everything with data. Let's look at what's actually coming down the pipeline, not what happened a few months ago, not what the revisions were. Yes, they're horrible, they're awful, and we can talk about those, but that already happened. What's happening this year? What can we expect towards the end of this year, and what companies and sectors are going to be a part of that? And that's kind of where I look with all of that. And I totally adore everybody else that is looking at these to at least so make the public aware of what is actually going on, even at that level, because I'm sure they're not going to get all data geeky like I am, but at least they're aware of what's going on. But for me, it's everything moving forward.
And that brings me to my biggest part of this. A lot of people miss, and please jump in. We see the layoff data, we see the quote unquote claims data, but both aspects of that miss a key part, and that is the bankruptcy data. When a company goes bankrupt, there's no requirement of a warn notice. There's no requirement of a layoff notice. If we shut down a plant or a factory or close operations in Orlando, Florida, and 300 people are laid off, oh, well, too bad. The HR person got laid off. And trust me, folks, the HR person really doesn't give a crap about reporting to the state that, hey, 300 people lost their jobs. So when you start looking at the bankruptcy data in concert with the other data, there seems to be a disturbing trend developing where we're undercounting the terminated labor, so to speak, in our society and missing a substantial portion of the risk of a greater level of under and unemployment than the BLS is willing to or able to capture.
Yes, absolutely. That is happening. I'm actually starting to model some of the ways to uh, model and see the indicators prior to the bankruptcy, how many layoffs are actually coming because of that, based on the bankruptcies. And that's not normally an area I go into. It's just when I started figuring out a pattern I could start seeing, and I was just like, oh, okay, let's do this. But there's so many more jobs lost than just the layoffs we hear online. And people forget that, whether it's a straight bankruptcy and the offices are closing, or they're shutting down multiple franchises or whatever, there are so many layoffs and exits, and that's kind of the term I like to use overall. It's exits. It can cover anything from a layoff to a PIP to to just like attrition that's not getting backfilled, whatever's going on. But yeah, there's tons happening on a daily basis. And and we have to remember, every time we know of a layoff, or we see a bankruptcy, or and places are getting shut down, or we see those massive headlines on on the news where 30,000 are losing their job, the multipliers associated to that. And what I mean by multipliers is all the other jobs that are adjacent to it that are also going to be laid off, because now this company doesn't need so many workers, because they're not going to be having the work coming from company having layoffs. Massive multipliers for each industry, and it's a little bit different for each industry, but all of that comes into play, and it's usually a 3 to 8 month time period where we start seeing that knock-on effect of even more layoffs. So yeah, it is bigger than anybody is really considering overall.
How are the corporate offices that you advise dealing with that concept, not from their corporations, but from a quote unquote trimming the fat theorem course of action? I mean, in my day, it was pretty simple. It's just like Office Space. You sit down with someone saying, what do you do here? And you go through the day, whereas a lot of us went into more detail than that. But the reality is, there seems to be a willingness to retain employees based on cost benefit analysis, not only based on just their skills, but also on their liabilities to costs, especially because of the way medical and benefits are structured in larger corporations. Is that something you're running across even more frequently?
Yeah, it's starting to change a little bit too, from that concept that we had before, where it is just that benefit and cost. But now they're like, we want to change everything. So companies are starting to look to contractors more so than W-2s. So when they are reorging, it's like, hey, can we bring in an agency? Can we bring in other contractors to take over these jobs, and they're not dealing with benefits and insurance and all that kind of stuff. So as they change, they are changing that scope, which we are seeing a little bit in the workforce data as well. Especially where headcount is remaining the same, it's just in a very different format. Overall, I think this will be the pattern that goes on for right now, until that AI peak that each company really wants is in place. And we're not there yet. They're still doing this push pull, trying to figure out what they're doing. And, when they say they're laying off due to AI, it's so not that. Looking at the workforce data, it's so not that. There's a few cases where that is it. But when I say few, I mean few. But overall, companies are just changing this complete labor model, and this isn't a cyclical thing at all. This is completely structural, and we are not going to go back to jobs as we remember them. Unfortunately, I don't see that. It's not in the company's interest to do so, especially as I'm watching them reorg and change everything. It's, how do we get better? How do we have that? Not necessarily a lean team, although they're really focused on lean teams right now. They want to get lean to scale and grow, in a more automation based way. So how can we take this moving forward? We've seen this. I mean, you talk about Walmart, for instance. They said, oh, we're going to put a pause on hiring, right, for the next several years while they put in automation. Well, that just means they're not going to be really backfilling much at all. They're going to try to figure out how to do this, and then they're going to get lean and they're going to move forward. So those are all the things that we have to consider. And that's big box retailer logistics, very different than, white collar jobs, but it is the same concept overall on what we are seeing.
That brings me forth to this idea that you just hit something that really was a home run. I'm noticing that a lot of push, and this is not to pick on housing, the National Association of Realtors has gotten enough abuse from me and a lot of my guests where we all know they're idiots and are just used car salesmen. But the idea of upward mobility and the lack of the education to teach the younger generation that upward mobility should be their first priority from age 20 to 40. I think that lack of incentive, this view that it doesn't matter, I'm going to get replaced by AI, is diminishing the hope of individuals versus giving them the willingness to learn the skill set to advance in this new economy. If you're able to adapt, you're going to end up a thousand light years ahead of your coworkers, but that also means the ability to relocate, which does not buying a home and anchoring yourself at one place and saying, I'm going to stay in Sarasota, Florida and look at sunsets the rest of my life. That's what us old people do. But to sit there and actually go out and be willing to transfer city to city, state to state, and make more money and advance through various corporations versus saying, I'm going to go to work at IBM. I'm going to work there 40 years. I'm going to get a pension. Those days are over. Is it not now time to become a pirate for yourself and to polish your abilities so you stand out when a headhunter or an advisor like Amanda is looking at companies and say, hey, I know this guy over here and he could fill this role blindfolded. Isn't that what kids need to do now?
It's absolutely what they need to do. I do as part of what I do, I am a niche headhunter. Where I just go, okay, if we're reorging, we're doing this, these are the people we need. This is the skill set, this is the background. What companies did they come from? What skills do they have? And I'm looking for this very specific role to work within the group to move the company forward on the plan that we've created. So yes, people have got to change what they do and really focus. And it's a weird thing because loyalty has always been a thing. You want to be loyal to your employer. Well, hey, you know what, they're not loyal to you either. So as bad as that sounds, my advice to anybody that is in a job or is looking for a job, your mentality has got to change as we are moving forward. And I don't think companies are going to hate me for saying this either. I would rather you find a job, get into your job, and start looking for another one immediately, right? Start having that skill set that maybe a niche headhunter is going to find you, or maybe you are just finding one and you're talking to the right people and you're finding another job. Because I would much rather an individual find a new job, get hired, be able to go to their current employer and say, thank you so much, 2 weeks, you leave professionally, instead of getting laid off because companies are changing so fast and so often that you're not even thought about twice. So I don't want you to have to be looking for a job 6 to 8 months, because that is the reality these days. So always be evolving and go be that pirate. Go, you're there to save yourself and you can better yourself in your career. And yes, you're right. The whole concept of moving around, that is becoming a situation. We are already seeing people having to stay put because they don't have the money to move. Companies do not offer relocation as often as they used to. Very few roles are going to allow that. Maybe you'll get like a 25, 30%, 30,000 extra bonus to do so. But that's not necessarily enough these days to do so. So, yeah, always be ready to be one step ahead for your career. And, companies will thank you in the long run for doing that. It's hard, it's tough, I'm not going to lie. But the more you can be there for yourself and to find those next steps, the more you are going to be able to relocate and have the life that you want to.
Yeah, I drew the line at northern Wisconsin when I moved back to Florida. It was a great job, but it wasn't worth the
Mhm.
money to eat it and go up there and freeze to death. Uh,
Yeah.
but there are a lot of positions that I interviewed for around the country, and you really have to. This is reflective of something I think that's changed. This goes back to the societal interaction. Do you think not just the societal interaction? Boy, this is a great show tonight, by the way. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank
Do
you.
you believe that the inability of individuals not just to sell things, but themselves is reflective of the social isolation we've witnessed the last decade?
Maybe a little bit. There's a lot of conversation about that right now, on, how people are supposed to react and do things. I think we're not going to see the results of that for several more years, on how that goes and how successful people are with that. Just, I think that's, yeah, I think that's just kind of a base level. We got to wait to see how it goes.
I've seen more hope in the 21 to 25 than I have the 25 to 40 from
Hmm.
my perspective. And it's
Yeah.
interesting because there seems to be a complacency that, oh, I got the job. I don't have to worry about advancing anymore. Whereas the
Hmm.
younger individuals with some or a lot of college and actually applied themselves or worked as an intern or worked through college are really pushing the effort forward. Provide some hope, but the way our system works, it's hard to sit there and say we're going to keep this level of individual achievement valued. The good corporations, and tell me, stop me when I'm wrong, the better run organizations will value individual achievement and go getters versus a lot of the crap coming out of our colleges.
Very true. Yeah. Any kind of individual contributor roles, those are the hot tickets right now, honestly, because they're seeing something different in those individuals to be able to stand out. That's something I look for specifically. Like, usually, if you're really good at being an IC, then you're going to do okay working amongst teams, even if it's just to do a small collaboration. You're going to understand how to get ahead a little bit faster and further. So you're going to be a little bit more valued as an employee on that aspect right now. And there's been so many people that they've just burnt out completely in management, being a director the last couple of years since COVID. And just, with everything that changed, and to see the change on everything. And I would say that 25 to 40 is about it, for those that are starting to realize the differences going on right now and how they need to react.
Well, thank you, because I think that the younger generation are not as jaded as us old people, and they're saying, you know
Hmm.
what, we can do it better. And I think that middle group that you just said, 25 to 40, we've been talking about, were educated in a different era when they were told, learn to code and your life is set, or learn to do anything but become uh, personally responsible and socially dominant in the workplace.
Hmm.
There are a lot of positions where people will not and cannot achieve overachieve. But if you provide people with that opportunity to overachieve or exceed expectations or seek further education and move forward, the younger generation seems more adept at that versus that middle group. And I really don't know what the cure is for that.
I don't know. It's funny that younger group. There are some that are adaptable on that, but they seem to also want to skip eons ahead, which doesn't necessarily work for every industry or sector or even the company. So you've really got to know your boundaries, and I'm speaking to the younger people right now. Know your boundaries, know the boundaries of the company before you do something crazy. To try to step out there, because you can harm yourself. I have seen, and companies are totally at fault for this. You might do something really great, and you're stepping out of your comfort zone and you're getting ahead a little bit. You get a higher job title. Oh my gosh, that is so going to affect you later, and really, bite you in the butt with, when you're looking for a job later, because you won't have that time length of skills that companies are going to need. So then everything's going to change, and it's going to kind of almost go in reverse. So be aware of what you're doing, be aware of the promotions. And I use that term very loosely because companies just love getting title promotions these days. Um, be aware of what's going on with all of that as you move forward in your career. It used to be a really great stepping stone. Now you just need to be a little bit more protective of, what you offer, and make sure companies are attributing that correctly.
Well, let's go a step further here, and I'm gonna. Which skill set are you hearing from the companies you're advising
Mm.
is more valuable, technical or managerial?
Um, Common sense, actually. um,
That's managerial.
Managerial. You'd be surprised. I would
No, I
say,
won't.
I would say it's usually probably more that managerial is has fast become. I've taken an academic course, so obviously I know how to do it. Well, that doesn't work in real business. You know that. You've run businesses. I've run businesses. Anybody that has done that, you know that textbook does not mean this is how it actually works in real life. So managers these days are falling into that heavily. Technical is good, but they usually don't understand how to actually put it into the real terms. So I think the key here is being able to utilize the skills you have, whether it's managerial, whether it's technical, no matter what side you sit on. How does it actually fit into the business properly? So having that business know-how and that common sense movement in your mind to go, well, the data says this. Yes, but what does that mean in context? Well, that's really important. And if you can't explain that, you're going to struggle. So, companies are looking for people that can provide that context, that can provide that bridge between everything, whether it's managerial, technical, or just anything within production. And they want to know how that one piece, how you and your expertise can actually help them move forward. And if you can't do that and you're just like being a manager and managing a situation, or you're just providing general technical expertise, it's not enough these days. It's not enough moving forward. And that's something we're seeing with that specialist generalist concept that companies are starting to change out a lot. And that's probably one of the biggest requests from the companies that I work with, is just like, they're good people, but they're not giving us what we need. How do we do this? And then it is a matter of finding the right people.
I had a great vice president teach me something once, and he sat there and pointed out your exact statement. And you may steal this if you'd like. I don't,
Mhm.
I don't. My copyright's about as useful as anything else posted on FinTwit. And he said it really, which really hits to the core of this. Anyone can paint in black.
Mhm.
And I think a
Right.
lot of people fail to see that being able to have a multi-level education and ability to deal with individuals in a broad organization is a skill that you develop at a younger age and advance through time. So I'm going to just
Exactly.
cheat here because I know you have a schedule, and we at MacroEdge Radio respect our guests. So, folks, it's time for the big question. And I'm going to give Amanda some time to answer this because she's on the front lines. She sees it, we understand it. A lot of us hear about it, but I'm no longer on the front lines. I'm just sort of one of those casual on the side guys now, offering snarky commentary and trying to have great guests like Amanda on to educate our listeners and advance the conversation forward. Are you seeing from a labor perspective and a hiring perspective more focus on qualified individuals or cost cutting in the big picture of things? And I realize it's a broad brushed question, but I think a lot of this that we're witnessing with the layoff notifications, the bankruptcies, the factory shutting down, the distribution center shutting down, it's an ongoing list. I just went through that list at the start of the show.
Mhm.
There seems to be a theme running where small to mid-sized corporations are scared to advance because of the economy, and large corporations are looking to slash and cut, but cherry pick from the top of other organizations at the same time. Where are we in this weird labor transformation?
Qualified for sure. Qualified for sure. You have this difference of, the larger enterprise companies that are just cutting, and they're saying it's cost cutting, they're saying it's AI, it's whatever. And they can do that. They can absorb that risks that they're dealing with anytime they want to advance, whether they want to take that money and put it somewhere else, or they just want to try to find other specialists that are more qualified to help them go to that next level. the, small, medium businesses, anything in that mid-market tier, they do struggle because they can't absorb that risk. So they are a little bit more cautious. They do things to cost cut, and that is harming them overall with growth. And we're seeing that. And again, this is almost like that K-shaped thing when you look at it with companies as well. There is becoming a big discrepancy on how far a mid-tier company can go if they're not willing to just rip off that band-aid, no matter how bad it's going to hurt, and actually start looking for these qualified people. And it is a case of, do they have the right strategy? How strong are they on that risk element? And do they have the right execution plan to make it happen without fail? And so that is what we see overall. And the big companies are always going to be doing this because they can. It's whatever. They'll give whatever excuses and examples they want to, for whatever reason they're going to do it. But they are constantly looking for the qualified candidates. And I don't mean that from an education standpoint, because a lot of companies, like I said, are not looking at your education necessarily. They just want to see your background. They want to see you can do it. Did you do it for another company? Did you do it for one of their peers? Cool, I'm going to pinch you. And we've already seen that. We've seen that with all the AI wars, between Meta and OpenAI and whatnot. And that's the same thing that is starting to happen on so many white collar roles. And, that's something I'm asked to do a lot, is to go find those exact people that we need for the new structure that we're coming up with. And the only companies really doing that right now are the larger companies.
What an opportunity for small and mid-sized companies to shark and steal talent.
Yes.
And make a change for the future. Let's hope they're paying attention to how economic development changes over the decades. One more time, at the Job Chick on Finchwit. If you're not following her, if you're not following me, if you're not following us, because we have a good time bantering if you haven't followed our threads before. Sometimes it's a little warped. We admit it, especially on data days. Amanda, is there anything else you'd like to close out for our listeners tonight?
I would just say, for anybody that is wondering if what these companies are saying out there in all of their earnings calls and their documents is true, check my X, and you'll realize most of it is not. I will be on top of that. That's one of my favorite things to do. As soon as they say something, I'm like, well, let's go look at the workforce data, and I will always live there.
Amanda Goodall, the Job Chick, thank you so much once again. It's always a pleasure to have you on. And we will talk again. I love having our conversations because we go in 10 different directions, but have the same focus. And it really does turn out to be something where somebody might learn something. And that's what this is all about. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in tonight. I will not be on next week due to some medical issues. No, I'm not dying, despite some of you wishing that on me in my private messages. May you all burn. I will be back in 2 weeks. I have no dang clue who will be on with us. We will hopefully have some of our big guests. The next couple shows, I'm hoping to focus on markets. When I say markets, this insanity we're witnessing, as I said at the beginning of the show, it looks like a topping process is underway. Does the process last 2 weeks or until the very next stupid tweet, post, or whatever from the administration or the New York Stock Exchange, or that idiot at NVIDIA whose stock is in the doldrums, if anyone's paying attention? Gang, we're going to have a good time. The spring session for Macro